Hey friends, I hope you're doing well. I've been reading this book and I think you're really going to dig it. This is Pledging My Time, Conversations with Bob Dylan Band Members by Ray Padgett. And what this is this is a collection of interviews. He's interviewed over 40 different people who have played with Bob Dylan, been in his band, been on the road with him in the studio at different points throughout his entire career. There's a lot of really good glimpses at what Bob is like, what it's like to play with him, what he likes about music, what he doesn't like, just what it's like to be around him day to day. If you're a Dylan freak like me, you'll really dig it. If you're just a music freak in general, I think you'll dig it because there's so many anecdotes about, different people that you're probably fans of as they come in and out of Bob's life. And on the back, it says, collecting over 40 original in-depth interviews, Pledging My Time is the first look at Bob Dylan's career entirely from the perspective of the musician standing a few feet away from him on stage, from his earliest days in the 60s all the way through the 21st century never-ending tour. There's a chapter on Jim Keltner, and that's what I want to focus on here, where he talks about the Traveling Wilburys and George Harrison's love for Dylan. And just to give you a window into what the book's like. This is, like I said, one chapter here, so we're narrowing the view. But for the record, I bought this on Amazon. I don't get anything from this. If you buy something from the link down below, I'll get a little bitty cut to get some guitar strings from. It starts off, he met Dylan through playing with Leon Russell. He says, yeah, I was over in England with my family and got the call from Leon to meet up in New York with the bassist Carl and Jesse Ed Davis, the guitar player. I didn't realize at the time how important those guys were in my life. We were a rhythm section. I hadn't really done a tremendous amount of stuff yet at that point, but I was doing sessions, and they would be on a lot of them. I always loved the fact that we were all from Oklahoma. There was that little bond. So this is Jim Keltner talking about playing with Bob Dylan on those first sessions. He says his phrasing and stuff is so unique. I just did an interview about Willie Nelson, and we were talking about phrasing being completely original and very much like a jazz player. As I was speaking of Willie, I felt like I was speaking about Bob. There's such a similarity in that they both are completely unique with their vocals, the way their voices sound and the way they phrase. I put them both in a jazz category. They don't sing like a typical rock singer. And it goes on and talks about recording Knocking on Heaven's Door for the Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid soundtrack. He says, in those days, playing a song in a movie meant watching the film while you're playing. I don't think there's so much of that anymore. The composer usually has everything mapped out. So I'm to believe, I know that they used to do that when they were making the scores for movies, but they were showing the scene while Dylan and his band were recording that. That appears to be what Jim Keltner's saying here, which is amazing and beautiful. He said, with Bob, Knocking on Heaven's Door was meant to hit your heartstrings hard because it was a death scene. The shot would go back and forth from his great Mexican actress, Katie Jurado, to her soulful big brown eyes. She's crying because her husband is dying at the edge of the river. To watch the scene unfold while you're hearing Bob's voice is just, he says, I cried. That was the first time I ever cried while playing. I thought, Jesus, I've got to be careful. I'm going to blow this take. To be moved to tears while you're playing your instrument is a gift, I think. Now, conversely, I did a session years later with Randy Newman where the lyrics hit me so hard I couldn't help but laugh. So he talks for a while about doing the gospel albums. I'm going to skip through that to get to the Traveling Wilburys stuff. The question was, how did you get involved with the Traveling Wilburys thing? And he says, that was George completely. George became like a brother. He liked having me around all the time for different things. When he was working on something, I'd be there. I think it was Harrison's Cloud 9 that preceded the Wilburys. I was at his studio at Henley-on-Thames, and we were having a ball. We always had such a ball playing, and especially there at the studio because it was in his home. His home was a massive monastery, Friar Park. Talk about a dream, it was always dreamlike. Now, Jeff Lynne was working with him on Cloud 9 record. Jeff and George had very similar senses of humor, the crazy English Monty Python humor. The more beers they had, the sillier they would get. We were sitting around one night. I think we had just cut my favorite song on the record, This Is Love. They're being funny and started making up names for a band. They started going and going. Finally, they settled on the Traveling Wilburys. They thought that was just hilarious. Then after we were done, I heard from George that they were going to go to Bob's house and cut this song, Handled with Care. The very next thing I heard was, hey, we're going to start a band. We're going to be the Traveling Wilburys. We're going to record a record. So then we started recording. It says, speaking of funny names, did one of them give you the nickname Buster Sidebury? He says, that was George. They expected me to be a Wilbury. At that time, I was thinking you got Roy Orbison, you got Bob, and got Tom Petty, and got Jeff, and you got George. That's 5 guys, 1 in the middle, 2 on the sides. If you put another Wilbury in there, then it's unbalanced. Which side would I be on? It's a funny way to think of it, but I was thinking like that. Plus, you've got 5 icons. I may be considered an icon in the drum world, but that's not what we're talking about here. And then he laughs. It was natural for me to say no. He said no about joining the Traveling Wilburys. It's amazing. So then it came to me. I'm a Sidebury. George laughed. He loved that. I said, I'm a Sidebury cousin, your first cousin. I was so close with Tom. He liked that I did that. He always made a big deal out of that in interviews. That's how I became Buster Sidebury. The other guys all smoked cigarettes, and I had quit. To be in one of those RVs that they have on the studio lot for shooting videos, 4 guys all smoking cigarettes, it was too much for me. During one of the videos, I jumped off the bus and I went over to Roy. Roy was sitting by himself. He was instructed by his wife, Barbara, you better not be smelling like smoke when I come to the set. We started talking. He said, this is really fun, isn't it, Jim? I said, man, it's incredible. You know, Roy, the guys are all here only because of you, really. They all just want to hear you sing. He said, well, I'm the only real singer in the band. The other boys are all stylists. I had to suppress a laugh. It was so true, but it was just so funny the way he said it. Just a matter of factly. The first freaking thing I did when I got a chance was tell George. He cracked up, and then I told all the guys, I'm the only real singer in the band, and the other boys are all stylists. It's absolutely true. I love that. So then the interviewer asked if there were any plans to tour and play live. And he says, oh, absolutely. There were plans, big plans to go on the road. We were going to go on a train tour. We were going to take a train across the United States. What's funny is that everybody assumed that it would be Bob who would nix it, but Bob was on board fully. It turned out to be George. I don't care to speculate on why he didn't want to do it, but he didn't want to. And the interviewer says that's too bad, and he says it certainly is. I think Roy had passed already. That may have figured into it a little bit. So I haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about what a Wilbury tour would have been. I think George's passing has overshadowed that whole thing to me. With George gone, it took a lot of the wind out of it for me. George is younger than me. George should be my little brother that I see all the time. He loved LA where I lived. He loved Friar Park. We should be going back and forth like we did all those years. It wasn't meant for him to hang around. He said, Bob is still here. And I'll tell you another thing. He says, George Harrison was Bob Dylan's biggest fan in the world. There wasn't anybody that I've ever known that was a bigger Bob Dylan fan. He knew the lyrics to every Bob Dylan song, old and new. I love the idea. I wish we had an album of George doing Dylan songs. It'd been beautiful. I can hear his voice on my back pages. Oh gosh, so many songs. I can hear his voice in my head singing that right now. He goes on to say the last time he toured with Bob was, he got a call, I think it was in 2002. Bob was touring in Italy and his drummer had some kind of carpal tunnel problems and wasn't able to continue the tour. And so Bob calls Jim Keltner out of the blue and says, I need you to be in Milan tomorrow. And Keltner's like, I don't know if I can make it to Milan by tomorrow. and he explains the situation. He dropped everything to be there for Bob, and he got there the next day. You know, he couldn't make it tomorrow, so day after tomorrow he got there and said he didn't know the set list, anything. And with Bob, it's always, you know, kind of interchanging anyway. It's evolving every night. So the drummer played the first half of the set, and he just listened. This is the vibe, this is the sound that Bob's got going right now. And then he came in and played the second half of the show, Jim Keltner did, and Bob was happy with it. And then the next night they played different songs, and he's just kind of making it up, you know. He goes, and it's kind of beautiful. Bob looks at things like that, where everything's always evolving. There's not one way to play things. He doesn't want to keep playing it the same way. Sometimes that's hard as a fan and an audience member. Sometimes it's amazing. When it works, it's beautiful and transcendental. Like Keltner says, with Bob, you didn't know a lot of times. That's the way it should be, really, if you think about it. There's nothing wrong with having a real good, well-rehearsed show, but I think real artistry is a little more than that. I think that putting the little element of danger or tension or whatever you want to call it into the situation is a good thing in some cases. He says, again, that's the fearless thing. If you're not fearless, you're going to be afraid. A lot of the musicians I know, we can smell fear. I know that sounds funny, but that comes from being in a studio with artists, making records where everything is on the line. Time is money. People's careers are being shaped or created. There's a lot of responsibility there. If you sense that somebody is afraid or reticent in some way, then you put that other hat on. The fun ones, the really, really fun ones, like Bob, Willie, or Neil Young, they got that fearless kind of thing that really makes it fun for the musicians. The playback is what I'm in the game for. I love hearing the playback to see, did we do good? Well, let's try it again. Or that's fantastic. We'll never be able to do it that good again. Again, that's Jim Keltner. It's in this book, Pledging My Time. It's really good. I recommend it for, you know, maybe, I don't know, man, Christmas presents or whatever, just for yourself. Since it's separated into these different interviews and different chapters, you're able to just turn the page to anywhere that day, and there's like, oh, Spooner Oldham, who knew? You know, or you go through and Kinky Friedman, you know. There's a lot of good stuff. I think you enjoy it. Like I said, I don't get anything from this. I bought this from Amazon. I'll put an Amazon link down below. If you buy something from that, I can buy some guitar strings with a little extra money. So if you read this book, I'd love to hear about it if you dug it. And if you'd like to hear me talking about Bob Dylan's book about the philosophy of song, you can click on this right here, and I'll see you somewhere down the road. Much love to you.